Little Old Harry and the Lumpers, Part 3. So little old Harry and little old Frank discovered that they had to master the power of flight in order to go up on the hovering motherships, somehow get into the motherships, destroy the multiplier machines, and from there it was just a matter of mopping up any commanders and any dead men left. Now, the dead men, generally, they tended to look about half white, half Asian, sometimes half black, half white, half Asian, Native American. But most of them looked half white, half Asian to that degree. I mean, you even might mistake it for Middle Eastern, but I mean, that's kind of sketchy, but most of them at first looked half white, half Asian, and now most of them just look white. I mean, multiplayer machines every now and then had to be modified because, certain strains of DNA tended to degenerate over time and became unstable, and they produced mutants with, that were just piles of protoplasm, or sometimes they produced birds that were too stupid to know anything, and sometimes the multiplier produced frogs with goblin tails. One time they even produced a dragon. It wasn't a very big dragon, wasn't a very vicious dragon, but it was an interesting brain fart of the multiplier machine. One of the commanders made it a pet for a while. It lived for a few years and died. He named it Minxie. Whether that commander was a demigod or just a mortal commander, that remains to be seen. The dead men, they tend to vary. Some were taller, some were shorter, some were fatter, some were thinner, some were assholes, some were okay guys, But for the most part, they all basically possess the same mentality. They would get mental commands to just attack en masse, or I don't know how you say that. Just overwhelm, throw overwhelming force. There were more genetically modified ones that attacked in more coordinated ways, but those were the elites. Even those ones kind of got killed easily. Most of them wielded daggers and clubs. Some of them were trained in the use of swords and staves and magic and stuff, but most of them were just typical grunts. And most of them didn't really wear armor. Armor was kind of expensive to reproduce on an extremely mass scale, so, they just gave them simple, clothes made out of common thread. Common thread was made by a machine that could take dirt and other tissue and living tissue or dead tissue and turn it into a thread, a fabric, in which these dead men wore clothing. They wore T-shirts with X's on them. They wore khakis. Sometimes wore gloves. Sometimes they wore armor that was made out of a stronger variation of common thread. They just wore basic clothes of, shoes, loafers, sometimes boots, but most of the time just, common shoes, common loafers, common thread. And it wasn't that as particularly tough against swords or anything. I mean, sword could just cut right through it, like it was nothing, like a hot knife through butter. But anyway, that's all the more of that. I'll go into detail for now. So, as little old Harry and little Frank were trying to master discover a flight, they had ventured pretty far off from their beginning point. from their little hidey hole from back where Big Old Mary and Big Old Harry was. Big Old Harry, lumpers, they can live for a couple thousand years on average. But Big Old Harry, he was a long-lived lumper, and he had to use a lot of magic to extend his lifespan, and it had some kind of warped his genetic code a little bit. He got so old he turned into a cricket. He could still, he could talk, but not in words. He would, he could talk in cricket chirps, and those could be interpreted, but, Big Ol' Mary, she didn't know cricket chirps, so she just kept him in a little jar with holes in it so he could breathe, and she fed him flies, Maybe someday, she could, find a magic spell that could turn him back, or worst came to be, if she just wanted to put him out of his misery, she'd been married to this dude forever. She was getting up there herself, and she kind of longed for death. When you live for a long time, death kind of seems like, the end of a long day. Not that I would know, per se. I've just, you figure, you surmise. It might be true, it might be not. If it is true, hey, I was a long shot there. I just guessed. If not, either way, it's pretty cool. Anyway, so he turned into a cricket. They lived underground. They built a burrow, and this is a pretty big burrow since Mary, she's like 20 feet tall. One day, the dead men discovered that burrow, and Big Old Mary and the cricket version of Big Old Harry, they had to fight. Luckily, Big Old Mary crafted a gun. It's a tiny, 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 tiny little gun made for his little cricket, legs to, manipulate and shoot. You could only shoot 5 shots, but each shot was like a thunderbolt. She put a lot of time and effort into this weapon. It was like one of the greatest weapons ever made in lumperdom. One of the most unique ones, too. A gun that a cricket could shoot. It's not a cricket gun. It's a gun called Big Old Harry's Equalizer. He needed an equalizer. He's a cricket. So, the dead men, they start drilling, they get their drills, they start drilling in the burrow, they start invading, they start, they just start swarming into the burrow, and Big Old Mary, she gets the sword that her grandfather, that got handed down from her grandfather to her father to her broadsword, she gets her battle axe, she gets her ceremonial rapier, she gets her ceremonial cutlass, she gets her other cutlass that she got during her pirate days, she gets her laser gun, and she's just killing them left and right. She's got an Uzi, gets a bazooka, the burrow's collapsing, she's trying to get out, she thinks she's got, Big Old Harry the cricket in the jar in her pocket, but the fall out, and she hears the chirping. She's like, Big Old Harry, where are you? She looks down, and Big Old Harry, he's got his little Big Old Harry's Equalizer, gun specially made for him, and he shoots 5 times, and, they're like thunderbolts. I don't know. I don't really know how to make a thunderbolt sound, but I'll try. Kaboom! 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 He kills 100 dead men, and then he kills a war beast that's a giant mole with razor-sharp teeth. And let me tell you, those war beasts, moles with razor-sharp teeth, they can bite through steel. And it kills it. The thunderbolts kills it, blows it to bloody bits. She scoops them up, puts them in the jar, and she just gets the hell out of there. At this point, that's to be continued. Meanwhile, the jeweler, Coro Thunder II, you know, he figures, listen, I got to do more to defend this planet than just be a jeweler. It goes against my trader's code, but I will take up the way of a warrior. I don't know how to wield a sword or a dagger or an axe. I'm not the greatest with the laser gun, but with the bazooka, I think I got a fair chance for taking out a few of these fuckers. So he goes to war. You know, he seeks out little Harry and little Frank. He gets surrounded by these special clones of dead men. You know, these ones were kind of like special elites, meant to sniff out, you know, they can sniff, you know, like if somebody wants to fight them or has, you know, rebellious intent against the dead men caused to enslave lumperdom or annihilate it or whatever, they can sniff it. You know, they have these long noses out to here and they have forearms, you know. They took some lumper DNA and they spliced it with the DNA of a dead man, you know, forearm, you know, they're all around him, you know, they're wielding swords and axes and daggers, and they're closing in on him. And he's got his bazooka, and he can only shoot this thing in one direction. And these things are closing in on him. I mean, if he blows this thing up at close range, you know, it's gonna kill him too. So he's like, well, swore I'd never use this potion because I knew I could really sell it for a lot, but guess I ain't got no choice. So he pulls out a potion, quaffs it down his scaly throat. His claws just, you know, grow like this. You know, he puts his bazooka back in his back head first, and, you know, he has these claws, you know. He's like, it's go time, motherfuckers. Just slashes them up worse than Wolverine could. Not a particular comic book hero. I'm talking like a real Wolverine on acid. No, not acid, but PCP. He just slashes these motherfuckers up into tiny little bits, you know. The potion only lasts a little bit. You know, his claws, you know, go back to normal size, you know, and he's like, whoa, that was a rush. And he sees a lumper off in the distance carrying a jar with a cricket in it. He's like, hey, over here. Thus ends Little Harry and the Lumpers, Part 3.